Okay, so I felt kind of bad because I haven't been able to stream a whole lot, but what I have been able to do is get OBS to record um, while using a different virtual instrument. So what I've got here is I've got a virtual instrument that's going into OBS a little bit differently, that's at least allowing me to be able to record something so that I can upload it to YouTube instead of stream it. So what I decided to do, because I can't really use that to create tracks, is to continue our series on theory. So I thought maybe what I would do is just kind of do these theory videos as YouTube videos instead of as part of a stream. So that way they're archivable, I can kind of organize my thoughts a little better, and that will give you guys, the audience, the ability to go through each theory part as it applies to you. Okay, so we're actually going to start over. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff I did on the last time I streamed, but before we get started, a couple of things that I'm sort of expecting you to know as an audience. I'm going to sort of assume that you already understand basic notation. I'm going to be using Sibelius to write some things in here. You should know different clefs, treble and bass, simple time signatures, 4/4, 3/4, 6/8, nothing crazy. You know, the ability to look at a note on a staff and be able to tell me that whether it's an A or B or a C or whatever is important, and the ability to understand basic rhythms, so whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, probably maybe eighth notes, probably not a whole lot more than that. So what we're going to talk about is scales and why they are the foundation of Western music theory and why they are so important to understanding everything. Why what a scale is sort of grows from a simple idea into sort of helping us understand everything about the way that chords work together, the way that obviously tonal centers or what we call key signatures work together, and all this other stuff. And we're going to do that by just taking a look at what a scale is today. So our goal today, at the end of this video, is to be able to understand what makes a scale major, okay? What is a scale in and of itself, and what makes it major. If you can understand those two things at the end of this video, I think that I've at least been somewhat successful. So we're going to start by just putting a note here on our staff. This is middle C. It sounds like this, okay? It's just a note, and it lives right here. And when we talk about how notes and scales interact, what we're talking about is a series of notes that ascend, that go up, or descend, that go down from one note to the same note of the same, to the next note, excuse me, of the same letter name. So in that case, if this is a C, that makes the next note up on the scale a D, and then one after that an E, and then an F, G, A, B, C. And what you have there is a scale. So if I play this, it sounds pretty good, right? It sounds like something you've heard a million times before. If you play an instrument, it's that thing that you've been forced to play over and over and over again. By the way, there's a good reason for that. So let's put in the note names because I feel like that's going to be really helpful. So let's do it with the lyrics tab. I think it'll be easier. D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay? So we have a scale. Now, we call this a major scale. Or in this case, it's a C major scale. Okay? Now notice that it starts on C and it ends on C. It doesn't start on C and end on D. It doesn't start on D and end on D. That would be a D major scale, perhaps, or a D Dorian scale. Talk about what that means later. So this one's ascending. I could make it descend. I could do this. I could say... Okay, those are the same notes backwards. You may hear my dog moving around on the couch in the background. I tried to use my nicer mic, but I couldn't get it to it. We're going to hide that. Well, we'll leave it there. Okay, so this goes up, it ascends, and it descends, okay? Now, what makes this sound good to you? What makes this C to C sound better to you than, say, B to B, okay, is the relationship between each note. So it's not the notes themselves, it's the spaces between the notes that define what we're hearing. I'm going to get rid of the descending part of the scale just to make things easier. So it's the relationship between each one of these notes that makes it sound major to you, okay? So the distance between C to D might be different than the difference between, say, B to C. It doesn't look like that on a step, and I think this confuses a lot of people. I think that this can sometimes make people wonder, get people confused, I guess. And it's important to understand that these notes are different spaces apart. Not all of them, some of them are the same distance apart, but some are closer and some are further together. And the way that we measure the distance between two notes in music is, let's just put on some box text, is we either call it a whole step or a half step. Okay? A whole step or a half step. Sorry, didn't mean to make that box big. Now, the important thing to know about whole and half steps is that half plus half equals whole. Okay, so when we say a half step, we literally do mean a distance that is half the size as a whole step. Okay, so if you take two half steps and you were to take that distance, you were to put them together, the distance you would get would be a whole step. Okay, now the cool thing about C major is that the relationship of whole and half steps is already there for us with the notes as they are. We don't have to go in and change the notes or do anything to them to have the correct pattern of whole and half steps in order to make a scale major. And the pattern of whole and half steps here is this. Between C and D is a whole step. This is probably a really terrible way to do this. Let's do it with some free text. So let's just say plain text. So that's a whole step right here between C and D. Okay, like that. Now, between D and E is also a whole step. So C is as far away from D as D is from E. Now it changes here between E and F. It changes to a much smaller distance, okay? This whole step is on the wrong, there we go. Between E and F, you can hear it when you listen to it. They're closer together, okay? So if I play them these notes at the same time, you'll really hear the difference. Between C and D is a whole step. Between D and E is a whole step. Between E and F is a half step. Listen. See how much closer you can feel how much closer they are together, okay? So our first set of steps is whole, whole, and half, okay? Now we have to measure the distance between F and G, and it's a whole step. So this is not helping me out here today. All right, between G and A is a whole step, between A and B is a whole step, and between B and C is a half step. Okay, so again, you can hear just like between E and F, between B and C, or down here, they're really close together, whereas, say, G to A is a half step. I could make it is a whole step. I could make it a half step by changing one of the notes. You can hear how much closer the A is getting when I do that. We'll talk about what that means in a second. So this pattern down here, this thing that exists naturally in the C major scale right here, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, is what makes a scale major. So whenever I say the word major, what I mean is a pattern of notes that comes from a scale, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. If you take nothing away from this video, take away the fact that major is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That is, there are 8 notes, and the steps between them follow this pattern. Okay? Now, Why does this matter? Let's go through a C major scale and let's change one note. Let's change one step. So I'm going to copy this whole thing over here, right down here. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the pattern of whole and half steps. Get rid of all of our note names here. This is no longer going to be C major. So what we have, these are horribly misaligned, but what we have is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay? It's the exact same as what's up on the top. Now, in music, remember we have these things called accidentals where I can take a note like, say, A, and I can lower it by one half step by putting this symbol in front of it, a flat, right? And again, this is something you need to understand before you come into this video. It's really important to understand accidentals before you get here. So hopefully that's something that you understand. So let's go through and let's lower this B, okay? Let's lower this B by one half step. So this B is now closer to this A, right? It used to be, okay, but now it's, okay, I've taken that B and I've just moved it down that much. And so instead of from A to B sounding like this, it now sounds like this. So I've moved it down. So I've subtracted a half step from this whole step. And remember, from above, whole plus whole equals half. So we took a half step out of this whole, so that's now a half step. Now I changed the other side too. I changed this B to C relationship as well, right? Because the B is now further away from the C. It used to be B to C. Now it's, okay, so this B is now further away, so I added a half step on this side. Half plus half equals whole. Okay, so now my pattern is whole, whole, half, half whole. It doesn't sound bad. You could do a nice song based on that. But it doesn't sound as major. For example, if I did Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and I made every B B flat, this is what it would sound like. So far, so good. Now, you couldn't hear it in the melody, but in my harmony down here, instead of going like this, it goes. And it totally changed the feel of the song. And you can imagine that the more I mess with this whole half pattern, the less major something is going to sound. Okay? Let's make that major again. Now it's major. Now we can have. Another good example would be Somewhere Over the Rainbow. If I were to put this B flat back in here and I were to use this weird messed up not C major scale, instead of in C major, what we get is in this weird thing where I've changed this. By the way, it does have a name. It's called Mixolydian, but let's pretend like we didn't say that. If I use that weird B flat scale, sounds totally different. Doesn't sound bad, but it sounds different. So just by making one tiny thing, I've totally changed the tonality of the scale. And that's the last thing we're going to talk about today. The last thing I sort of want to make sure that we cover is this idea that when we create this whole, half pattern, we're not just defining the spaces between the notes, we're also giving each note a role, a job to do. Okay? So when I have this C major scale that starts and ends on C, as we have here, notice that as I reach the top and bottom of the scale, it sounds complete. It sounds like something that we've arrived sort of at home, to a place of stability, right? If I put some harmony with cheat a little bit here, we couldn't end there, right? It sounds a little too unresolved. I mean, we could, but it would sound unresolved. To make it sound nice and firm and resolved, we have to come back to C. Same thing coming down. If I just stopped there, some people would hate it. And it's understandable, right? Because it sounds incomplete. We have to land on our C to sound good. So in a C major scale, in a scale that starts and ends on C, C not only functions as sort of the beginning and end of the scale, it's also the home note. It's the most important note. It's what we call the tonic. Okay, C has become the tonic. Okay, and that's when you hear the phrase tonal music. What it means is that it's music that has a tonic. Now we'll talk about much later what atonality means, what it means if we don't have a tonic. But in Western music theory, a tonic is the home note of a scale. And when we're talking about majorness, whole, whole, half relationships between notes, that whole, half pattern makes C sound like the home note. Okay, it makes C function as the tonic. Okay, we could say that we are in a C major tonality, meaning that C is our home note. When I did that example at the bottom down here, where I stuck B flat in, one of the reasons that doesn't sound quite right to us all the time, one of the reasons that sounds different, maybe not bad, but different, is that when there's a B flat, C doesn't sound like the home anymore. This note that I landed on is not C. This note that sounds like it might be the tonic, it's not C anymore. It's a different note. So just by changing the whole half relationships between the notes, I've made a new note, the tonic. I won't tell you which one. Those of you who are ahead of us and maybe are doing some review already know what happens when I add a B flat. It changed which note becomes the tonic. But that's true of anything. Okay. Now, for those of you who know what modes are, you're saying to me, but Curtis, if I am using C Mixolydian, I can sort of tonicize C and that we're in C Mixolydian. I understand that. Let's go ahead and ignore modes for just a second and just remember that C is the tonic. Okay? So let's review what we did today. What we did today is we looked at a scale. We understood that a scale is an ascending or descending pattern of notes which follow this pattern, which have this whole half relationship between them. We understood that by doing that, we have made one note the tonic. We have made it our home note. Okay? That's all we've done today. That's all we're going to cover. So, if you want to do an exercise with an instrument, what I would do is, if you can just sit down at a keyboard, the nice thing about C is we don't need to use any of the black notes. If we just play with the white notes, you can always feel that C is the home note. Give me just a second. I'm going to put up a keyboard on the screen. Okay, so here's a keyboard. Let's pop this guy out. So if I'm going to play this well, does it show me? Oh, good. So it's showing you what notes I'm playing. So if I'm just playing around with white notes with just one hand, notice that every time I land on C, there's a certain stability. And you can do this with anything. Sounds like the home. Now, if you're trying to do minor, you might feel like A sounds like the home. Even there, though, if you press C enough, it eventually becomes tonicized, as we would say, not tonicked, but tonicized in your ear. So that's our first idea. That's our first lesson. I know this is review if you have been watching my streams. I have not been able to stream recently because we've got some technical issues with El Capitan. I'm not able to load my whole template. I can load piano, so maybe we'll do a piano track at some point. I'm hoping to have one or two of these videos out a week, and we'll just kind of go through music theory one at a time, and we will understand it. Thanks for watching. I will see you later.